Perfect. So the first part is I would like to share why I decided to focus on walking in mobility as a service solutions. Why addressing this? So this started from two research objects. First of all, it was MaaS, mobility as a service, and then while investigating and studying mobility as a service, we saw that this innovation, organizational and technological innovation, that aimed at providing alternatives for the private car by offering individuals and users more mobility services and some seamless mobility. It was there in the definition that we found the first barriers to the subject of walking in MaaS, because walking, it is not a service. And so far, and I will show you a little bit further, it has been only included in MaaS solutions and even MaaS-like solutions in a very basic way, as I will show you a bit later. So first, I'll start by describing a bit of the two research objects I just mentioned. So first of all, walking as an element, as a catalyzer element for health and environmental goals through cooperation was one of our main interests. So we saw that addressing walking by mobilizing certain policies that could help transition towards more sustainable mobility practices was going to also support at different levels the sustainable development goals. For example, I just put here some of the ones that we have targeted or that have come up during my discussions with actors in the ecosystem. So these are just some examples of what walking could enable, and the potentials of what the potentials we see of walking in of better integration of walking in MaaS. So, for example, the developing the attractivity of the territory, and also allowing people to get to places to achieve their economic goals too. All of this also by exploiting the potential of MaaS, of high customization, high personalization, and so on. Then, speaking of health too, we have very worrisome statistics, I would say, that, for example, in France, there are only in France, but in the world, cardiovascular, I hope it translates well, disease are some of the main death causes in today's society. And there are several studies that have already shown and proven, tested that increasing walking distances or cycling distances, this is like to mention active modes, has a relevant impact in reducing these illnesses. So speaking of our research terrain, the Ile-de-France region, so the Parisian region, I like to say, always to share my motivation on this topic, that there are two big reasons on why this is very important to be addressed. Because we already have people out there that's walking because they want to, because they have to, and that represents a big part of the trips made in the region, all up to 40%. And we have also people that have mobility constraints that need to have access to more detailed also information in order to get to places and to make their lives. And it is through this prisma, it becomes an issue of mobility justice and social justice. So through accessibility, this research topic becomes something very relevant for societal goals too. So as I was saying, we have people already walking, but we also have people that don't really walk yet, or that don't consider walking as a possibility. Either it is because of mobility constraints, or because the information is not there, because they feel infrastructure is not there too. So either it is because you already walk, or because you're not walking and you need motivation, information, etc. We found that this topic was very relevant. So to give you a bit of a context of the modal share in the Parisian region, we have, first of all, walking, and a big part also of public transport and private car. If we take into account that public transport users need to reach, and even private car users, they need to reach their destination, and there's this first and last kilometers, and also the connection in between of the, for example, the metro and then maybe a bus. There is a need of providing relevant information and detailed information for those pedestrian pieces of the trip. So just also for context, the Parisian region is a very well-connected region, mostly at its core around Paris. And the PTA, Île-de-France Mobilité, has the role of organizing, financing, and promoting this public transport system, and also of being part of the region. They have the competencies and the objectives to achieve a certain goals on modal share. For example, they have set the goal of achieving a 10% of walking modal share, and we are quite far from it. For example, increase, 10% increase. So I wanted to also share some of the pedestrian profiles in the literature, because when we speak of walking, there are so many things that walking itself requires, and it's a subject itself. So when we talk of MaaS and the digital realm, we add another layer of complexity. So in order to be able to address the topic, we have started to look into the profiles that literature, the typologies of pedestrians in literature, because that is the way we can focus the strategies or the discourses towards the actors, as I will mention a bit later, taking into account that the needs are different. And this is also to highlight that currently the approach we found in mobility as a service for walking is an approach for pedestrians, but it doesn't take into account specific profiles and different needs. We have found also that some of the barriers for walking are related to access, to ability, and to ambitions. That means wanting to. So, for example, in the access barriers, we have the socioeconomical barriers that, for example, living in an environment that allows you to walk. Sometimes you don't get to choose, or you don't have the potential to do so. Also, having access to information on how the environment is perceived, or how which would be the best route to take. And also for the access part, we sometimes individuals sometimes face physical and motor barriers that could hinder the engaging in walking. And when it comes to ability, it's similar to this last one I mentioned, but one that is very in line with what we are researching is the usability barriers, for example. So this has to do with the lack of experience or the lack of familiarity with the accessing information sources like smartphone platforms. And it's one of the main barriers that we have found so far. As for ambition, so we have the social norm related. For example, I am from Mexico, and usually there is this social norm paradigm that walking is for those that don't have a car. So it's a status sign or a lack of status sign if you're just walking. In some places of the country, for example, to some social groups. And also it is a matter of experiences and personal perceptions. If you have had negative experiences in the streets, it is going to be less likely that you're going to engage in walking. So all of this to say that that research object, it's quite complex itself, and it needs to be addressed separately than from MaaS. So on the other hand, as I was mentioning before when we started this presentation, it's mobility as a service as a second or main research object. And it fails, MaaS, we have found that so far it fails to deliver the promises that started 10 years ago almost, regarding the seamless mobility, regarding the alternatives to cars, because on the one hand there has been quite a bit of problems by finding a business model that works, and this also is related to the user adoption. So MaaS operators have tried to create the most profitable business model, but still users are not engaging in these solutions because there are some barriers on the way information is shared, and the seamlessness is not yet achieved. So it's not yet an alternative. So to sum up this part, we have that we want to improve pedestrian mobility in MaaS, and we found some variables that we could focus on to test how we could get there. So we decided to focus on the design of MaaS solutions, MaaS governance, and the attitudes and behaviors of actors and stakeholders towards MaaS and towards pedestrian mobility. So to do so, in the first part of our research, what we did was to focus on analyzing 4 MaaS solutions available in the Paris region, and focus on how they would provide information, pedestrian information throughout the itineraries proposed. So so what we did was checking out this 4 solutions, and this led us to some interesting findings. For example, through taking into account universal design principles and UI principles, we let's say illustrated here how they prioritize different modes through their user interface. And if we take into account these principles, the way we prioritize the information we offer to users of these platforms has a significant impact on the access this information is going to have, and the use of this information. So it might not seem like a huge problem, but it has, and it can have some intense consequences. And an example of it is that, for example, in the B image to your right, this is from Google Maps. So here, when you ask for a pedestrian itinerary to go from center Paris to northeast Paris, what they did is offering me to take an electric scooter. So they show me the comparison. It takes you half the time, and you will have only to pay 6 to 7 euros. So this is a nudging strategy that we identified here, and not necessarily favorable for walking. And then in the first picture, the letter A, this is from the Parisian public transport operator. So this is more of we categorize it as an incentive, which is clearer and less subtle, or than as a nudge. They're offering to a couple of alternatives, to win alternatives that doesn't include very sustainable modes, for example. So the role of mobility as a service and the role of the choices that MaaS operators make is quite important. So our conclusions on that first step of the research, well, not conclusions, we aggregated the main implications that we found could be related to the lags, to the current lags. So they were that we analyzed them through the steeple framework, that were social, technological, environmental, economic, and political implications. And based on this, we decided, or we focused on, we built a research problem, and we focused on the fact that currently pedestrian mobility is underdeveloped in MaaS and by the MaaS ecosystem. So when we talk about the MaaS ecosystem, it's actors, which is the enlarged version, then the stakeholders, and then territories conforming this ecosystem. So to sum it up, I wanted to show you this kind of a systemic interaction reflection behind these two research objects. So we have the individuals that are conforming institutions, that are protected by institutions, that are walking by choice or constraint. So we have institutions supporting walking, enabling it, and also they have the same role to enable and somehow regulate or even provide, depending if they take the role as MaaS operators, MaaS. So at the same time, individuals also enable MaaS by using it, as I mentioned before, by user adoption. It's a very important element on the success of MaaS. So we found that there's this weak link between these two elements of this systemic interaction. So walking and MaaS are not really being related. So we're going to address them through these key actors or elements, individuals and institutions, as a part of the stakeholder ecosystem. So our research questions are what the levers are that we can identify among the stakeholder ecosystems to improve walking in MaaS in the Paris region, and what governance configurations of MaaS could facilitate or hinder the integration of walking in MaaS. As we started exploring in our first, in the first part of the research, that I didn't give many details on the results, but we studied the two public platforms and two private ones. And as I showed you in the nudging scheme lab, it was Google Maps and the City Mapper, the private ones, that were providing more information and more resources for pedestrians, for example. So if these private actors are doing so, we can imagine there is a model behind and that there are some opportunities to seize. And at the same time, if the public ones are not doing so, we can imagine there is an opportunity space to address. So for this second part of the research, where we are addressing this stakeholders ecosystem, we propose to look at the stakeholders ecosystem to identify this resources, this power and interest that we can mobilize to develop more walking in MaaS. So what we did, we started by mapping the stakeholders ecosystem, and we launched a survey that was targeting mainly the actors in the ecosystem, several actors in the ecosystem. And also in parallel, we launched this survey for users. Even though it's not going to be representative of the whole population of the region, we wanted to have a bit more detail on this specific actor, a stakeholder in the ecosystem, because users are a main stakeholder in the ecosystem we are analyzing. So in addition to that, we also are carrying out one-to-one interviews with stakeholders that have responded to this questionnaire and that may have a key role in the change of the current situation. And so this is a first glimpse of the map of the ecosystem. The main idea behind it, or the conductive idea behind the mapping, was to address it through a governance perspective. So we mapped actors related to the internal governance of mobility in the Paris region, and also actors related to more external governance. So as the little note said before, here what this map is missing is the interactions between the actors. But that's why we started with we addressed this interactions and the details on the interactions in the questionnaire and in the interviews. So that should be an iteration of this mapping. So part of what we are exploring with the stakeholders during the interviews, it is this more of mini focus group exercise inside the interview, where we map the interest and power from their perspective, and they place themselves too in this map, but they also place these other actors and their roles in this matrix, where we can start having an idea of the roles and the actors that are taking those roles, that have a high power and a high interest to address the topic, address the development of mobility, of walking in mobility as a service. So that is what we're working on currently. And some of the future perspectives of the research is to develop a MaaS integration level index, where we could actually measure the level of integration of walking in each of the MaaS solutions. So we are studying and trying to identify how could we evaluate this level of integration, because sometimes, for example, data does not depend. We can evaluate the level of information and provide it, but sometimes data, it doesn't really depend on the actor that's carrying the MaaS project. That's one of the limits, for example. We are wondering also under which dimensions we can develop this index. and who may have the responsibility or the competency to check or to evaluate this, and why doing so. We imagine, for example, that it can be a way to help MaaS operators to receive some sustainability related subventions. I don't think that's the word in English, but I will think about it. Sorry. Financing, for example, and also as a way to ensure achieving sustainability goals related to access and to the main elements I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. So far, yeah, this is another future perspective we're actually working on in parallel, and it's making a little bit aside, putting MaaS a little bit aside, because even though the potential of MaaS is there, we just assume that these are all the potentials that MaaS would have to incentivize walking. We wanted to focus on modeling some impacts of providing economic incentives for walking in the region. So to do so, we propose a perspective of the polluter pays. So it would be something paid by car drivers as a kilometric fee, for example, related as the urban tolls in London. And then we are analyzing if this can bring a model shift from driving to public transport or other modes. So on my side, this is it for now. This has been more of a panorama than a very result approached presentation, but I hope it was interesting for you. And if you have any ideas, commentaries, and suggestions, I'm open for it. And yeah, I will share the results of this work later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mariana.